I was asked a question recently, and it got me thinking for a while. And it was why I've been taking a deeper interest in British history. I guess it's fostering a sense of identity. It's helped me understand my place within a larger narrative, and it sort of fosters a sense of belonging, a connection to the past. I think it's also given me valuable insights into the development of a nation that has significantly shaped the modern world, not always in a good way. And I think furthermore, studying British history has aided me with critical thinking. Now, I think the earliest written evidence for being British is from Greco-Roman writers, and this dates from the Iron Age. And these ancient Britons were made up of many tribes and kingdoms, often associated with various hill forts, and the Britons followed the ancient Celtic religion overseen by the Druids. But today the word British is used to describe a citizen of the United Kingdom, which includes England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. But sadly we seem to be losing our identity fast. In some quarters it's almost racist to consider yourself British, and our history seems to be getting distorted by political propaganda. So after nearly half a century of being fascinated by history, it's only in recent years I've come to understand how much misinformation I was fed about the past when I was younger. The truth of it all is often frighteningly different from what I was taught. Historical denialism, I think it's called. It's a falsification, trivialisation or distortion of the historical record. So it's of extreme importance to learn the true facts about our past as accurately as we can, so we can understand the present with more clarity. And one period of history I realised I don't really know much about is the Norman invasion. So here's some unusual facts I didn't know about the Normans. Now, much of today's English landscape was shaped by the Normans. And the Normans were a group of people descended from three groups. There was the Romanised culture of Gauls under the rule of the Roman Empire, or Gallo-Romans I think they were called. The indigenous Franks, who were a group of Germanic peoples who emerged near the Lower Rhine in the 3rd century, and they expanded into Roman territories in Gaul and established a powerful kingdom. And then you have the Norse, or the Vikings. Now these so-called barbarian pirates, who were ascribed no particular religion, they originated from the Nordic lands of Norway, Denmark and Iceland. Now, although the Norman reign included plunder and war, they were quite an interesting people. Norman jesters. They were more than just entertainers. They were skilled jugglers, minstrels and soldiers. The jesters were vital for keeping the spirits high and maintaining the morale of the troops, even participating in battles during the Norman conquest. One example is Ivo Taifa, and he was William, Duke of Normandy's jester, and he travelled with him to England during the Norman conquest in 1066. He was a juggler and a minstrel, and he'd entertained the troops with comical and often bawdy songs, as well as feats of dexterity. Now, tricks with knives, arrows, swords would be commonplace, but like most jesters of the time, Taifa was also a professional and highly trained soldier who would serve at the right hand of his lord. Now, highly respected by William's army, Taifa was the opposite to the common notion of what a jester was. Our modern interpretation of what a jester was is mostly clouded by Victorian imagery, a figure of ridicule and foolishness. Now, as the story goes, they just marched from the north of England, and Harold's men were given 5 days' rest before battle commenced. And early on October the 14th, 1066, Taifa was bored, so he rode across the battlefield towards King Harold and the English army. On his own, he began to taunt Harold's men by riding up and down their front line, waving his sword in the air and spouting derogatory poetry, mostly about King Harold. So this obviously angered Harold's men, and the English soldiers broke the line to charge him. Still on his horse on his own, he charged the English line, reciting the Song of Roland, an epic poem. Now, apparently, he managed to take out at least 4 more English soldiers before being overwhelmed and killed. Various accounts from the time tell us that he continued to recite the poem with glee until his last breath. But it's thought that this single act of bravery, or lunacy, was enough to rouse the fighting spirit of William's invading army. After seeing the death of their beloved brother-in-arms, their jester, they charged the English and broke them. And around 9 a.m. on Sunday 14th of October 1066, 2 days earlier than planned, what will become known as the Battle of Hastings began. And by dawn of the same day, with King Harold slain, William, Duke of Normandy, earned his new moniker, William the Conqueror. Now, the Normans loved hunting, and it didn't take them long to establish royal forests as designated hunting grounds. They set aside this land for hunting, which they completed on horseback with the use of birds, and they hunted for food and sport. They were primarily for the use of the king and his nobles. These areas known as royal forests were not just woodlands, but could include a variety of landscapes like fields or even villages. And forest laws were introduced to strictly regulate these areas, restricting the rights of local population and reserving hunter rights for the king and his elite, which is still going on today. Yeah, and these Norman forest laws, introduced obviously after the conquest, were a system of laws designed to protect royal forests and the game within them, primarily for the king's hunting pleasure.
Now, these laws led to displacement of people from their homes and significantly limited their access to resources like timber, building and fuel, and they'd be severely punished for violating these terms. Edward the Confessor was King of England from 1042 until his death in 1066, and he was the last reigning monarch of the House of Wessex. And Edward was a son of Ethelred the Unready and Emma of Normandy. And he succeeded Canute the Great, and he restored the rule of the House of Wessex after the period of Danish rule, after Canute conquered England in 1016. And Edward's death on January 5th, 1066 triggered a succession crisis. It really led to the Norman conquest. He was succeeded by his brother-in-law Harold Godwinson, who was defeated and killed in the same year at the Battle of Hastings by the Normans. Now, apparently, William the Conqueror's coronation was a bit of a farce. In 1066 it ended in violence due to a misunderstanding between Norman soldiers and the assembled crowd during the ceremony. Apparently, while the crowds were shouting their approval of William's coronation, the Norman soldiers outside misinterpreted the noise as a sign of English rebellion, or as an assassination attempt. In response, they panicked and began setting fire to nearby buildings, causing a riot and scattering the congregation. Despite the commotion, William remained on the throne and insisted that a coronation ceremony be completed. This demonstrated his determination to establish his authority, I suppose, as king. And then at the other end of his reign, William Conqueror's funeral was hurried. When he died in Rouen from a riding injury to his intestines, about 1087, his body was transported to Caen, but the journey was delayed and caused by a fire and land disputes or something over the burial site, and it led to significant decomposition of the body. Also, his coffin was built a bit too small, they put a bit of weight on apparently, and when servants tried to squeeze his body into the tiny space, his bowels burst, emitting a terrible stench. As you can imagine, the burial was rushed to completion because the stench was too much for most of the people, most of the congregation, with only a few monks remaining to finalise the process. William's tomb was later disturbed several times, including during the French Wars of Religion and the French Revolution, with his bones eventually being lost, except for one thigh bone. Now, this is probably my favourite bit about the Normans. Fairly quickly after the conquest, the Normans built at least 1,000 motte and bailey castles in England and Wales. And this reflects their effort to establish and consolidate their control over the newly acquired territories quickly. They needed to bring law and order to the countryside due to the constant unrest between the Normans and the English. and they were a crucial part of William the Conqueror's strategy to consolidate his power and control the new conquered territories. He used motte and bailies because they were relatively quick construction with a wooden soil and very strong defence. And these castles were strategically placed to control key routes, towns and areas of importance, helping to assert Norman authority. And the imposing presence of castles served as a visual reminder of Norman dominance and a deterrent to rebellion, I guess. Castles were not just military structures, they were also served as centres for local administration and the collection of taxes. And King William took a liking to the castles as they became a symbol of his strength. Now, apparently, the Normans were keen on playing ball games. The normal castle workers played a game called handyball. This was played with a large leather ball, like a football, and two curved sticks. And there was also a game similar to tennis, only they used their hands to hit a small ball. An interesting fact is the Arabic word for palm of the hand is racket, and it's probably where the word we use today in tennis comes from. Now, I also learned that for over 300 years after the Norman invasion in England, Norman French was the aristocracy's language in England. So modern English originated from a mix of like Norman French and Old English. Many Normans were said to be generally of a large, robust build, and it's thought this was inherited from Rollo. He was a truly giant amongst men and was particularly a fierce Viking. And Rollo founded Normandy, and is the offspring of Rollo and his followers, through their intermingling with the local population, became known as the Normans. And his nickname was the Walker, because he was said to be so big, too big to ride a horse. The rumours put Rollo to around 22 stone and 6.5 feet tall. Like I said, giant of a man. However, these tales could have been started by Rollo himself to strike fear into anyone that might want to cross him. Originally, Rollo served under the Norwegian king, Harald Finehair. But when he started to raid France, he gained more independence from Norway. Now, his first raid on France was unsuccessful as they didn't really know what they were going to find as they sailed up the River Seine. But they returned later to successfully sack Rouen. And after many other successful raids by Rollo and his men, including the siege of Paris, France's King Charles the Simple had to accept that there was no sense in fighting the Vikings because they couldn't win. So in the early 10th century, Rollo and his Viking followers were granted land by the French king in exchange for loyalty and protection against further Viking raids. And as part of the treaty, Rollo agreed to convert to Christianity and married Charles's daughter, Gisela. Now, originally this land that was given seemed uninhabitable. It was marshy and generally undesirable. It was located between the River Epte and the sea. But he managed to quickly establish strong laws and a system that allowed the region of Normandy to grow and thrive. And Rollo's descendants, the Dukes of Normandy, played a significant role in European history. And his great-great-grandson was William the Conqueror, who, as we know, led the Norman invasion into England and became king. Now, to many, Rollo is remembered as a pivotal figure in Norman and English history, considered the founder of Normandy and the ancestor of many European royal families, including the British monarchy, and of course from the TV series. Well, there's no official record of his death. Rollo was believed to have died around 930, and it's presumed that he died of old age. And his tomb is still on display in the Cathedral of Notre Dame. Now, a question I had to find out about, what was Rollo related to Ragnar Lothbrok? Sadly, the truth is that Ragnar and Rollo didn't cross paths, and they certainly weren't brothers. And although they were both believed to have lived in the 9th century, that didn't live at the same time. This is a shame. Now, if you manage to get this far without getting bored, I'm quite impressed, and thank you very much. And if you fancy it, like and comment. It'll help the channel tremendously because I've not getting many comments lately. And also subscribe if you fancy it.